What's up, folks? Casual Dad here with the next in our installment of Warhammer Combat Cards Warlord Guides. And if you've been with me so far, we are in the home stretch. We are almost done, and kudos to you for getting this far. Today we're going to talk about Commander Farsight, leader of the Farsight Enclaves, and one of the more interesting Tau characters to me, with a sweet new model that came out, I think, earlier this year, if not... If it's older than that, time does get away from you. But anyway, very, very cool Warlord. One of the strangest Tau cards because he is very melee focused. And I did a short video a while ago on melee Tau. It's not completely out of the question, but you need some ridiculously highly leveled and fairly rare cards to do it. So I'm going to do kind of a half melee, half range deck with this guy. We'll look at that in a minute. But rolling in at 41 points with a good chunk of health, Commander Farsight is a very sturdy commander. And he's what we call a Headhunter, and we'll talk about his abilities that make that in here in a minute. With Headhunter being that he is meant to hit the battlefield with the opposing Warlord and take that Warlord down in one-on-one combat, which makes him very fun. That's kind of that like Bushido challenge he's got, and he's got the Japanese aesthetic and the model work and everything. So he's a really interesting one to play, and I personally prefer him to Shadow Sun. Shadow Sun is more in theme with Tau, being really ranged focused. But Farsight himself offers you that balance where the entire deck can be range focused, but then Farsight himself is much more melee focused. So you can actually build up a pretty decent melee hit with Farsight throughout the game, and then end the game with melee after having gone through most of it with range. So that it is actually a really good way to play these decks to balance it out so that you're, as you're readying and building up charges in your attack types, you save your Warlord's attack type through the entire game so you get a beefed up hit in the end, which he actually helps with his ability. So Farsight is epic. He levels fairly slowly. He comes stock with Furious Charge and a very healthy melee attack base. Used to not have a ranged attack. They actually tweaked that and added that recently, which is really good because that gives him a much better matchup against some of the shielded Warlords out there, which is really good. He was struggling a little bit at upper levels because of that, and since that addition, it's made a dramatic difference. And it's not just shielded, it's also cards that are like an Akaran. You can take it down. You can kill a surviving Akaran card with that ranged attack. So he's also been given the secondary trait of Inspiring Presence. He's epic, so it only maxes at level 2, but it still is a free bonus. If you're going to have a free secondary trait, that's a pretty good one to have. And then his ability, it's a bit of a strange one. When your last card is deployed, your deployed Tau cards heal to full wounds, and your melee attack readies 5 times. So what that means is you get a really, really good big melee buff because, ready? Oh, what is that? Yeah, your melee attack readies, yes, okay. And one of the key things I want to make sure to mention that is true between Farsight and Shadow Sun is that ability triggers on last Tau card deployed. Actually, it triggers on last card deployed. It doesn't even have to be Tau if you're doing a mixed faction deck at some point in one of the events. The really important thing to highlight there is that doesn't have to be Farsight himself. With these hit points, with that melee hit, you can drop him on the board as your second to last or even third to last card, hit something really hard, and then play your following card or cards to actually heal him up after he's taken some damage. If it's a close fight, having him be not your last card can actually help you make the difference because you get that healing later when it matters as opposed to getting it too soon. Just want to make sure to highlight that. And now we're going to look at some of the cards that end up in the deck. I'm sorry, my deck building tips for Tau have not been particularly good because the thing about Tau is they kind of build themselves. You take your highest level, best ranged cards that fit. If you have the legendaries such as Long Strike here, then certainly include him. Or you can lean around the Riptides because the Riptides do have meaningful melee attacks once you get up to a certain level. So they can actually balance Farsight by being, well, not that one. Your base Riptide is a decent one to put in here because it can kind of balance Farsight by actually being very punchy in the late game as well. So this is a really good piece to include. I would actually tend for Farsight to include the Riptide over Long Strike. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and sub that out and just pull some pieces out here real quick. He still does like your heavy ranged attackers and does benefit quite a bit from your, what am I saying, barrage cards, just because Tau in general really likes barrage and has some really powerful cards. It is important to note that his ability does not factor at all into the game until he hits the board. So that is something to keep in mind, and that makes him somewhat of a more challenging Warlord or a higher level requirement Warlord because he doesn't help at all in most of the game. That said, he can be a very good early starting Warlord, and in fact was one of my best Warlords starting out because he himself has very effective stats at fairly low level. So if you get him and you're playing in kind of the under 1k range, certainly consider trying out Farsight because his role is to punch the enemy warlord in the face. If you're behind and say they've got a full board against your just warlord, Farsight can still turn that around because he is a decent enough solo operator to finish out a game by himself. Now, I had this set up to be a sort of weird melee deck with this guy in here. I'm going to see if I can keep him in here. So what do I take out to make that? Okay, so we're going to make it weird. We're going to play a really, really strange deck. What I had in there was my melee deck, an actual melee Tau deck, and I'm going to see if I can pull this off with just this. And you're going to see the abilities trigger, but I may lose. I'm not actively laddering Tau, so this is not going to be a terribly difficult matchup for the level of cards I have, but let's see. I say that, and then watch me get my butt kicked. Cool, we got a melee-focused Warlord. That is a good matchup for the famously ranged-heavy Tau, but also balances out well since I do have a bunch of melee cards in here. Oh yeah, that ranged ready is not in time. We'll do this guy. Got our outflanked dog here. This is an interesting piece to include even in a ranged deck, because as you're doing ranged attacks, he's actively debuffing melee, which is not bad. And we're actually going to start punching in melee, which is exactly what I've talked about not doing, but you know, why not? So this, again, is a really strange deck. I don't recommend playing what I'm playing. And then in the next game, I am going to play a more sort of standard Farsight deck to kind of show you what that looks like. Maybe. You know what? I'm not. I'm going to keep playing this because I want to highlight how Farsight works, and you're going to see a lot of quote-unquote fairly quote-unquote standard Farsight decks and Tau decks as you're playing the game, so it's not hard to picture how to build a sort of standard one, so let's stick with the weird one. So I've still got my Inspire melee card in here. I've got Farsight himself. I can shoot in a pinch. I've got some very beefy shooting attacks, but I also can hold my own in melee, even in the mid-game here. Ooh, tough call. Do we shoot and take out the shooty, or do we punch and take out the punchy? We'll punch and take out the punchy. We'll take this guy on the right. We'll keep the Crute Hound awake a little bit longer. Now, they've recently released some new Tau cards as well, so there are some better Crute you can fill this deck with, and that you can put in for like a melee-focused army. You can put in a couple more of the kind of 20-ish point Crute, and it is actually a pretty decent deck overall. It's a little bit squishy, does not offer a whole lot in the hit points range, so that is definitely something to be aware of, so you will be leaning on Farsight himself quite a bit more. And because Farsight himself is, I believe, the most expensive of the Tau Warlords, he is easier to fill weird decks with because you don't need as many deck points to fill out a whole deck, which is actually an upside in some ways to your more expensive Warlords, is you don't need the same number of highly leveled cards to compete. Let's see where your attack is. Well, let's do it. We're going to punch him. I'm going to punch Gosar. And again, one of the things about Tau decks, even if you bring Farsight, you probably bring Farsight because you want to play Farsight on the board. You want to see him in action, which is really fun. But you will find that in a lot of games, if your deck is built well, Tau decks will tend to win before the Warlord hits the table, which is also good, but can be a little disappointing if you want to bring out your punchy Warlord. But we'll go ahead and smack him. So, not a very challenging match, but you got to see kind of how the mechanics of the deck worked. I am going to go ahead and play that deck again. Again, just so you get kind of the experience of something a bit strange. If you would rather see me redo this with a more standard deck, just drop me a comment and let me know. But big thing we talked about in terms of building a more standard Farsight deck. Computer flashed a bit strangely, but we're okay. The more standard Farsight deck is, again, just take your highest leveled ranged cards for Tau, the ones that fit by points, start with something beefy like a Riptide or Longstrike. And the big reason to do that is so that when you do deploy Farsight and get that healing, that you have at least one heavy hitter on the board that benefits a lot from that healing. That's something I should have emphasized right in the beginning, because that is kind of a key piece of the whole deal, is it heals both Farsight and your bodyguards who are on the table. So that's a way where a lot of the time, if you're playing against a Tau deck, if it's a Farsight or a Longstrike deck, you will really, really want to make sure that if you're going to deal damage to a card on the board right before the Warlord drops, that you kill all of them. Because if you do a little bit of damage, but don't finish off the card, then as soon as that last Tau card is played, everything's going to heal to full health. So if they're running a double Riptide, or if they're running the Barracuda Barracuda, whatever the big flyer with barrage is, or just anything else with some really beefy cards or shields, you're going to find that it's significantly harder to beat it if they are able to pull off that heal on their really beefy cards and keep them in the wings. So I can't even count the number of times I've gotten the 2 really beefy bodyguards down to like 2 hit points, killed the squishy in the middle, Warlord drops, and I lose because they all were healed up back to full health. So you want to watch for that. And as you're watching for that, also kind of take notes on when you can do that as the one playing the Tau Warlords. You're going to get weird here. This guy, man, I'm really excited to actually level him up. He's a fun card. So this is sort of your linchpin of your melee Tau, is your heavily shielded Inspire guy. Legendary, so can actually get quite scary and combos beautifully with Farsight, especially because he's a card who, because of his shields, will tank a ton of damage over the course of a game and then start taking damage when his shields go down, which is probably right about when you'll be able to drop your Warlord and really kind of juice him back up to finish up the game. But yeah, so just to recap here. Let me see if we can clear some of these shields. He's got 3 shields, great. That's a high-level Swarm Lord. Yeah, so just to recap, you want to take your best combination of stats. You want to focus on your high damage, so your highest level damage, but also keep an eye on your hit points because you want some durable cards that can tank through the course of a game and then also are able to last long enough that you can heal them up to full when you drop your Warlord. Just like Shadow Sun, Farsight's the same kind of concept. Yeah. I'm gonna give it to Anshi. Anshi. Yeah, it is. I don't play Farsight very much anymore, so it is really, it's a lot of fun to get back to him a little bit here and there because he was, again, one of my most successful starting Warlords, and I played Farsight for a long time, early on when I first started the game. Simpler times. But yeah, we get to do it. There it is. That was really risky because it is, no, he doesn't have enough to hit me in 2 turns. But so I get that Furious Charge, but note I don't heal because he's not my last card. So you get to put Farsight on the board, which I really wanted. My math is not great, but that is not enough. I'll just ping him. And there, that Crude Hound really saved my butt, because if he started building up that melee ready, this Swarm Lord could easily turn this around and one-shot Farsight. So that is something I want to watch out for. I still don't think I have it. He's doing the same thing to me with those melee readies. Or with this guy is also debuffing my melee, so this is a battle of endurance. These endgames where the AI is choosing the most survivable route can be a little infuriating. You can just see yourself slowly losing, but I'm pretty sure I've got this one, just because of card levels. If that deck had been a little higher leveled, I would have been hosed. I think I got it. We're going to do it. And we got it. Ended the game with Farsight himself like a champ. I couldn't have done that better if I'd planned it. So there you go. That is Commander Farsight. He's a really fun Warlord. One of my favorite Tau Warlords, and just one that I have a lot of nostalgia about because I did play him early on in the game. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know.